I will always add glyphs of the day in case you want to learn. These are common signs. The one on top is ah, and for some unknown reason, it is a bird. So we call it an A bird because we have no idea what kind of bird it is. We have depictions of that bird, and apparently it's associated with that sign. And the sign is the beak of that bird or the whole like head. And there are a couple of examples of the full body A bird, some kind of mythical animal. And this is a ha sign, which usually is a tooth, like an inlay of sorts, but no saliva, just some like object that presumably gives a clue to what kind of thing it is. And then a skull with a knot and a darkness on it. So a silbo ha. They're both relatively common. And then just so that we have this contrast between two different h sounds, so this is a ha. So ha, ha sounds. It's more like Spanish jota. That's why we use just J things to indicate that. And the basic form is a crescent. It's like moon crescent with 3 dots. So if the whole thing, sometimes separate in the middle, so actually looks like a crescent the way you would see it in the tropics, sort of lying horizontally, or just half of it. And just so that you remember this sign for 20, they're very similar. The same crescent, except 20, it's kind of darkened cross-hatching in the middle, and here you have 3 dots. That's the only difference. And of course, sometimes the moon sign you would get like actual moon goddess, sometimes holding a bunny in her arms, because that's what the spots on the moon are. They're a rabbit.
Wow, that's very similar to there's like a Chinese.
Exactly. And the idea is that it's actually, there are people who track mythology across Asian and Pacific area, and there are a lot of other similarities between basically Southeastern Asia and the Pacific area and the Americas. And along with some genetic traits, that's basically a shared legacy of migration of and the ancestors of present Asian populations, of course, indigenous American populations. So the bunny on the moon is one of those things, kind of shared theme. But our today's class is the first grammar lecture. So we're talking about pronouns. And Mayan pronouns are not exactly like our pronouns, because European languages and Mayan languages, they belong to different groups of languages, like broadly speaking. And Mayan are an ergative language. So just like English, there are dependent pronouns or bound pronouns and independent pronouns. So like when you say I or he or she or it, you always assume that something will go with the pronoun. That pronoun cannot exist by itself in a sentence. It needs something. That's like a dependent pronoun. And an independent pronoun would be like, as for me, as for them, as for him, as for her. Like that can go on its own. You can say, me, no way. So in this phrase, me is actually an independent pronoun. Now, English lost a lot of cases. So we basically have 3 forms of every dependent pronoun. Right? It's like nominal, nominative case. There's a prepositional, something goes with prepositions, and possessive. So it's like, I heard about me taking my chair. So I, nominal, nominative, heard about me, prepositional. So everything that in other languages like Latin or German or Russian would have like 10 different cases. And it's all basically dumped into one. And then the possessive. There are no cases in Maya pronouns. In fact, there is no gender in Maya pronouns whatsoever. In fact, there's a lot less gender in Mayan languages than in English. Nothing is gendered grammatically. You can mark something specifically by adding prefix ish, saying like basically female something. But you don't have to do that. And also with pronouns, they're basically like they, right? So something we have these discussions today about the nature of our third person pronouns, the way they indicate gender. Some people prefer to use the pronoun they. That's very much like what my pronouns are. In third person, even the plural is not obligatory. So it's very much like they. So they is, they are. You can add the plural at the end. So say with an independent pronoun hao, which is like they in plural, as opposed to they singular. But there is a catch with the Mayan pronouns that makes it harder for the speakers of English. So first of all, Maya pronouns don't stand alone. They're either prefixes or suffixes to verbs and to nouns, but also to adjectives, if adjectives are used with nouns, as they usually are. So that's the first big difference. So they never stand alone. That also means that if they're attached to a word that begins with a vowel, remember, there's weird things happen with the vowels, they can change a little bit. So say a prefix ni can look like w if it's in front of a vowel, or niw. The prefix a can look like au. The prefix u, if the word begins with a vowel, it will actually be y. What linguists call glides. That's what happens with pronouns, prefixes. And then with suffixes, the third person singular is 0. Now, what is going on with prefixes and suffixes? Well, they form two classes of pronouns. We call them class A, class B. Some Mayan languages like Cherokee have 3 classes of pronouns. So depending on whether the action is complete or incomplete, pronouns change. Fortunately, it's not happening with the Maya, the classic Maya language, so we're in luck. What happens here is the same pronoun prefix marks possession, like mine, but it also marks agents of transitive verbs. So the same prefix. So if I want to say, I take you, right? So I take and my take, it's actually the same prefix. And then the suffixes, the absolutive pronouns, or said be pronouns, they mark patience of transitive verbs, like he takes me, that me is that suffix. But within transitive verbs, they mark the agents. So, like I left and I left you, I would be different pronouns, right? It's like to leave someone as opposed to just leave in general. So when I say I left, I would say loken. I left. And en is I. But if someone took me, they would use that same en to indicate me. So it'd be a suffix. So that's sort of the main challenge, because there's nothing to compare to in English, right? Because this function of pronouns is just not the same at all. That the same I can look exactly like me, depending on whether the verb is transitive, so requires some kind of patient, an object on which the action is directed, versus intransitive, that basically happens to the agent, right? So like, I sit, that's an intransitive verb, right? So it means said be pronoun. I take, said A. So you just have to learn it. There's like no way around it. The other thing about Maya pronouns in general and Maya languages in general is that they do not require verbs in the sentences as the English language does. So in English, of course, you can say something without verbs, but only when you speak, like colloquially. So you can say something like me no way, and everyone will understand. Or someone can say, when is the class? And say like at 9 a.m. But grammatically, it's incorrect. You have to say, it is at 9 a.m. You don't have to do it in Mayan languages. There is, in fact, no articles and no obligatory verbs in Mayan languages. So a class at 9 a.m., the class at 9 a.m., there's no way to mark that difference except by additional words or by additional emphasis. And there is no verb to be. These are just some examples from present-day Mayan languages, Cholan languages. So Chol, Akalan Chontal, Chorti that I studied, and modern Chontal. Akalan Chontal is a colonial variant of it. So Winiken, person, me, actually means I am a person. Or like you can say I'm a servant as well. Padre on We are padres. Of course, padres, priests. It's in a text. In a colonial, like we are priests. Padre on. Ish, chokob. Ish, female prefix. Chok, young person, unripe person. Ob, plural. They are girls. If you assume that it's a statement, but it can also mean girls. Like you basically say girls, right? You don't necessarily have to translate as they are girls. There's no grammatical distinction between the two sentences in Mayan languages, only when we translate based on context. Wayanen, I slept or I sleep, where wayan is to sleep, and n is me. It's an intransitive verb to sleep. You don't sleep anyone or anything. You just sleep by yourself. So that requires a sad be pronoun. Hulelob, they came. And now ob is plural. Hulel is to come. In fact, this one is like they came, but they didn't come. Or like they're coming, more like that sense. And once again, because it's a third person, there's no other marker. So we would also put a little zero. And then chunwanen, I was there. Literally, I sat there. Because since there's no verb to be, as such, in Mayan languages, you have to express the state of being somewhere through a different verb. So when you want to say that you were somewhere, then you need to express it more specifically, like I stood there, or I walked there, or I sat there. And sitting actually is the closest to our notion of being, like positioning yourself in sort of stable way. So for example, when you translate like a basic Christian prayer, Father in heaven, like our Father in heaven, so you would say, Katat, our Father, Tachan Chumulet, in heaven you sit. So that would be like a pro-Pacholan way of saying our Father in heaven. You had the question?
Yeah. Is the language like, I guess, more metaphorical than English? Or?
Yes, but also because it's what we think certain categories are natural, like being somewhere. And so when the Maya person thinks of being, they imagine sitting. So it's like different languages have different logic to them. Like sort of embedded notion of what's the natural state of being. So we don't necessarily imagine our bodies in space as accurately. We just don't think about space as much as speakers of Mayan languages do. But in Mayan languages, the position of body is very important because, for example, there is no independent frame of reference in the language. It has always be in relation to something. So you cannot just say, I go up, or I go down, or I go left, or I go right. You cannot say that. It's a major problem with driving because you see somebody's next to you and like, go left, and you're like, who's left? In Mayan language, it's an impossible situation because there will always be who's left. So you cannot say go left. You can say like, go to the left of the car, or go to my left, or go to your left. Like the left is always has to be possessed. And same goes same for up or down. So you cannot say go up. You can say go to your up, or go to my up. Go to the up of that like corner. So Mayan languages think differently about space. Like if you learn in Mayan language as a first language, you think about space as always related to something. And believe it or not, they're actually like sociolinguists who study the way it affects perception. And they put speakers of Mayan languages in various situations and they count their response times, for example, to a particularly challenging question. The same goes for ergative languages, the fact that everything is possessed. Same goes for sitting. Sitting is being. And so when you see someone seated in art, it's more than just sitting. They are in whatever state they are. So it transcends translation issues and becomes part of how you interpret visual art. You see someone standing or walking, that's a different state. It means you're transitioning. So when you marry someone, they say you end your road. When you die, you take your road. You begin your road. because you basically moments of instability, right? Transition. So you marry someone, you start a house, your road has ended. It's not a bad thing, right? It's basically achieving a state in life. And then obviously when you die, you're in flux again. Your soul is moving somewhere from where it used to be. This is another great example this is from a religious document. Ma tawalen shochiket tinse. Ma, not, tawalen, me, adequate. Not adequate I am, right? Shochiket, so that you could enter me, this Holy Spirit, into myself. T in myself. Into myself. And remember, this is our liaison, like something we talked about, that ta in one of the vowels has to go. This is colonial orthography, so they're not very careful on glottals and anything. Tinse, into myself. Uts and oni, good me before. Like I was good long time ago. Like I'm used to be good, not anymore. I'm not ready for the Holy Spirit. It's a typical Christian discourse, of course. But the important part is there are a lot of statements here, right? And there are no verbs, like mata walen. And then shochiket, so that you could enter. Like och, optative, something we'll discuss, of course, when we talk about verbs. So shochiket, so that you could enter into me. Tinse. So mata walen, so this is said be absolutive pronoun, not ready, not worthy. Shochiket, so that you could enter, so another absolute pronoun. This is ergative, into myself, tinse. And then uts, good, me, in the past. But we would translate it as a verb, like I was good before. But it's actually, there are no verbs in the sentence. So like Star Wars statement, Luke, I am your father, right? You would say, Luke, your tat, father, and taten. And of course, Luke would not say no, because no is ma. So he was like, ma, and then he would jump into the, so Luke, taten, ma. And of course, with the glottal stop, so we wouldn't be able to say like ma. It was like ma, and then so some scenes they don't translate very well, but now you know at least how to say it in the Mayan. The problem, of course, with the stative expressions is it gives us variance or possibilities of translating the same thing, like captive. Is it like a text says, here's a captive, or it's actually a statement, that person is a captive, especially when it's third person, so they don't have to put a pronoun next to it of any kind, because the third person singular is zero. So you can think of it like bak and like put a little zero up there, and we use this kind of crossing lines indicating this is not letter O, just is number zero. So bak, he is a prisoner, he's a captive. Or 13 stones. It can be a reference to, a building of 13 stones, but stones can also mean years, because you put like rocks every year, like monuments. But also there's a common metaphor of time, that time is like precious stones you collect in a bag. And we see it in multiple Mesoamerican languages, the idea of like years are like stones. And so the word for stone also means years. So this can be like, it's 13 stones, like 13 years, or it's been 13 years, or 13 years. And all these possibilities, unfortunately, you don't need verbs. And of course, when you speak, your intonation is telling what's going on. And when it's in a text, it's mostly from context that you understand what the person actually wants to say. So there's always this ambiguity whether this is just what it is or an actual sentence. So you can almost turn every noun into a sentence, especially when it's just by itself. So that's a bit of a problem with translating Maya texts. But of course, Maya texts are not alone. I'm a speaker of Russian. That's what you do in Russian. That's fine. I mean, any open literature text would contain sentences like this. Like you open a piece of Russian literature, and a certain percentage of sentences will look like 13 stones, captives, and no articles, of course, just as well. So when we say a prisoner, that's how we interpret it, right? Maybe he is the prisoner, only from context. This is another great example. So a name of a ruler contains the sign for red, and then the possessive, the ergative u, and then syllables pa, ka, la, kinich, chini. A weird way to spell the name Kinich of the sun god, literally the fiery one, the hot one, or the resplendent one, depending on different translations. So u pakal, the shield of the sun god, u pakal Kinich, the shield, his shield sun god, literally. Red. And of course, because red is at the beginning, it's like the shield of the sun god is red. And there are variants of the name like the fire. The shield of the sun god is fire. And other body parts and things that belong to sun god are either red or fire. And there are many names like that. How would you translate the word uchak pakal kinich? So chak upakal kinich is the shield of the sun god is red. What about this? Uchak pakal kinich.
The sun god's shield is red? Or
No, that would be the same. That would be chakupakal kinich. Sun god's shield is red. But if I move u one word forward, what happens? Sorry? No, no. I mean, this is just possessive. So possessive is here, and then the pakal, the shield, his shield, sun god. So the shield of the sun god. But if I move it here, what happens? So if it's here, the shield of the sun god, red. And if it is in front of red, so how does it change the meaning of the phrase? Remember, it has to be possessed, right? And it's only one thing can be possessed here, right? I didn't add another pronoun.
so we're treating, I guess, so you would end up treating red like an entity, like it's red's shield, maybe? Or
The red shield of the sun god. Like in this case, the red is also possessed with the shield, but it's not the red of the shield of the sun god, because then I would have to add a second possessor here. So uchak upakal it should be like the red of the shield of the sun god. But since there's only one u, I have to treat red and shield as one entity here. So basically the red shield of the sun. So it's an analytical language. So it's you have to translate based on the order of the sentence is always the same. The only thing that moves is the prefix, possession. So now someone has to possess, right? And it cannot be pakal, because then there's no relationship between pakal and kinich. So then it means that this whole section, chak pakal, is possessed by kinich. So the red shield of the sun god. So absolutive pronouns, they are generally less common once you go beyond the third person singular, because most of the manuscriptions are third person singular. But sometimes, occasionally, Maya texts and visual narratives break from this tradition of basically not talking except in third person. And usually it happens when you have a scene and people are talking to each other. And quite often that is recorded, remember, from the spelling discussion in just syllables, as if I don't know what they wanted to say, but this is what they said. And of course, that's false, because a lot of these texts are retrospective. This scene that actually represents nighttime chocolate drinking event. So according to the text, you can't see a lot of chocolate, but there's like one large cup, and they're holding yet another cup, and there probably was more here. So it's a chocolate party. Apparently, it's tikal chocolate, like chocolate with alcohol, like Irish chocolate. So it was a little happier than mere chocolate. So they're all drinking chocolate. Obviously, no one is really drinking in the scene, because it often happens when you depict like official people, like to show them actually drinking is a little off. So they're just talking around chocolate drinks. This fellow, there's a ruler on the throne, very obviously so. And his arm is like this, which is my gesture of respect and submission. So you respect someone really a lot. You do like this, right? Like really respect you, and this person is respectful, and he's saying something, and he says, "Awi na ke na yola chan." I am your man. Awi na ken and me your. Awi na ken. I am your man. Yol chan. Yol, heart or center of the sky. I am your man, center of the sky. Apparently, he's looking at his king, right? And you have to remember, it's 50 years after the event. So someone really wanted that fellow, who happened to be someone's dad or grandpa, right, by that time, to say those words. It's like a display of love and loyalty. And he is just, according to the text, he is just some person from Mushkan, like a priest from Mushkan. I guess he was very important later on, and I really wanted to say that he loved the king. This is plural on, and we don't have a lot of examples because you actually need people to actually talk about like us together. And there's these poorly understood texts, which is basically like a board meeting of all the gods. They meet close to the creation and discuss creating humans and doing other things. And so this is a speech of the King of Gods, and apparently it's about, let us do something. It's like a group. Let's do it. And also there's a lot of like, you all will do this, or you all will do that. Unfortunately, the grammatical form is opaque. Some sounds seem to be missing here, as it often happens with fully syllabic spelling. So we can see that it's bishwahon, probably from let's, something us, or let us do it. But precise identification of the wah part is problematic. So some people suggested it's bishwahon, or maybe bishi wahon, like a compound. But since it's unique, it's very hard to translate, as it often happens. All we can say, one of the few examples when we have basically us plural absolutive pronoun at the end of the word. This one is better understood. This is a scene of education, teachings. You have teachers, letters, and numbers, very much like us today. And this teacher says, Chokon tatab, let's erase it. The lines. And you can see that he seems to be unhappy about something drawn in front of him. And the students look, well, this guy looks like, the lines? Well, what's wrong? They're fine. And behind him is like, no, not good. Mouths. So, and the next fellow, of course, does the same thing with numbers. So this is an example, another example of like this optative, like let us erase. So together, let's erase this thing. Because the lines, and we don't know what the problem is with the lines. We don't see the lines. Apparently, there's no point seeing the lines. No, not worth it. It's traumatic, but that's what is going on. This is another great source of pronouns. Unfortunately, highly damaged text from Copan, and it's like the size of this table, slightly wider, and it looks like a step, but it was an altar, and two large incense burners stood on it for like a century, and they were constantly replaced, of course, leaving these scars, like two spots, from probably temperature shock, like because they were hot. So part of the monument literally flaked off. The other side is mostly intact. And believe it or not, but there was like this much ash around it from like constant, because they were not taking ash from the censers away, they were just dumping it inside the same room because it was, I guess, too holy. They just kept doing it. And this is a prayer of the king, maybe fourth or fifth king of the dynasty, to the founder of the dynasty. All the entire text is a speech, which is like weird, right? And then towards the end, it probably said, these are the titles of the king who actually did it. So here it says, Chen, as I say, or as he says. It's kind of hard to decide whether N is actually me saying or some other. And then Kaltun Hish, and the rest is basically his titles. So This is all his speech. And so it has a lot of pronouns, as you can imagine. And it's a weird place to place a prayer, not publicly visible, but that's pretty much, I guess, the idea, right? So the king's words, they continue working in the darkness of the sanctuary of the temple in the Holy of Holies. And here, for example, he's saying, Umamat, you are his grandfather, or you are his ancestor, presumably addressing the founder of the dynasty. So it's some kind of evocation of the founder of the royal dynasty. Umamat. You can also translate it as, of course, you are his grandson, but this is less likely given the context of the inscription. The word mam can actually mean both grandfather and grandson. This is a variant of that second person singular. Instead of saying at, umamat, here it's et. Seems to be a dialect on the same vessel when they discuss gods. Unfortunately, this part is eroded, but it's ket, something ket. You would do something. Now, ergative pronouns, the trick and the problem with ergative pronouns is because they depend on the initial vowel. It's easy when the word begins with a consonant. Then you just have u, third person singular. And there are some variants of u sign. But then with vowels, you can have like ya, yo, yi, right? Because the initial vowel can be different. So that third person singular would not be the same. And then, third person singular. And then the first person singular would be like ni and we and wa. Those are basically different ways to spell the same pronoun, because you have to spell not just the pronoun itself, but the next vowel, right? Because you use syllables. So there's a lot more variation in spellings of how you can actually see it in the script. So, ni buku, ni buk, my clothes, but you can also translate it, it is my clothes. Ni mom, he, she, it, or you can say they is my grandfather. And of course, they is my grandfather would be much closer to what actually means in Mayan, with no gender identification whatsoever, and plural and ambiguous inherently. Right? But you also be like grandson, my grandson, he is my grandson, or grandchild, they is my grandchild. And then kamam, our grandfather. Or I would say like, I am your grandfather. It would be like, amamen, right? Or you are our grandfather. It would be like, kamamat. Here it's, he is our grandfather, or she is our grandfather. Although mom usually refers to men, the corresponding term for women is mim. We don't see it very often. I think there's only one example from the sarcophagus of the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque text. So this text contains, for example, wahwal, my lord. So the king talks to his ancestor and he calls him my lord and says like my ruler, like he serves the ancestor. And that's a very important trope of Maya political rhetoric. Like the kings don't do things by themselves. They usually do it in service of their gods, and more often than not of their ancestors. Who are the true rulers? So like you may heard that Incas had a council of the mummies that was technically the supreme political entity of the empire. And each mummy acted through its own interpreters, which was basically like a council of the main clans, panakas, of the empire. They could voice the opinion of the entire clan through their mummy. The Mayas thought of their royal families as something like a conglomerate of deceased ancestors who could voice their opinion, presumably through qualified specialists, especially through the king, of course. So he could always say, it's not my opinion, I talked to my great-grandpa, and that's what my great-grandpa told me. The consensus amongst my great-grandpa and great-great-grandpa is that we have to do this and nothing else. There's another example of wawal, my lord, but here it's a hummingbird, and it says, Ma shupchan, it shall not shupchan. And we have no idea what shupchan is. Presumably something that happens to drinks. It shall not shupchan the posole, it's a kind of corn drink, for bitter corn soup from roasted maize. The posole shall not go shupchan, my lord, before your face, which now, or in front of you. So the posole shall not go, presumably bad, in front of you, my lord, said the hummingbird to Itzam Kokak, the king of gods. And it's interesting that the drink is actually not posole, it's atole. So there's some kind of twist in the story that we're not aware of. So the hummingbird is actually lying. Well, we don't know what's going on. So my lord. And these are just some other examples. Your heart, awol, it's part of a statement that a king is addressed. He just arranged the accession for his children, 3 sons, as his heart is finally at peace. Kimhel awol, your heart is at peace. Somebody from, of course, royal court comments, to, retrospectively, of course, to the scene. Ak uhul, it is your God. Ak uhul. Or Amam, he is your grandfather. Or your grandfather. Because if it's in a sentence, some other sentence, like, for example, Ukaphi Amam, as your grandfather wanted, or as your grandfather ordered. So you can say, like, I'm going to help you because of your grandfather. And it's a very common trope in Maya text. Because what your grandfather did, I owe you that. So that's how Maya nobles would often justify their actions, by appealing to the unions and relationships between their grandparents. This is a text that contains a lot of my lord, but they're actually all wasted and drunk, and they're doing things, talking about good stuff, honey wine, and this fellow, for example, says, Kushban awol, may your heart be happy. May your heart, and they even make the glyphs drunk. Like this is a bat, and it looks like it had too much honey wine too. This one says the drunk, Lukon chok, and so some of this says, O uchan wawal, this is your supervisor, my lord, and you can see the supervisor is also off. So it's an interesting scene of party from the side of Sapote Bobal in the western part of the central southern Maya lowlands. And this text, returning to this text, it has more pronouns, of course, because it's a speech, right? And what we see is akohul yatah or yatich, the problem with our spelling rules. Tach abil akbil or tach abal akbal. Does anyone remember what it means? Abal akbal. Abal akbal. Sorry? Shield is pakal. Darkness. What goes with darkness? It's a couplet. When you were defeated, you lose it. You no longer have it. Sorry? No, not divinity. Yeah, the power. Like the power is darkness and what else? Darkness and looks like a bloodletting tool.
Sacrifice.
Penance. The word is penance, or because it literally means like fast. So your penance, darkness. And so it says, this is your God. He washed in your penance darkness, my Lord. You are his grandfather. It's kind of weird, right? Because the grandfather of God, but it's maybe they're talking about recently deceased king. But it's interesting because it seems to be a discussion at like an avocation of the ancestor. And the ancestor actually does sacrifice, presumably from the other side. Like living people and dead, they work together. And it says Akab Chen or Akab Achen. It is your land, like kingdom. It is your cave, and the term usually means city. We'll talk more about landscape and the way Maya talk about landscape. So it is your city, or it is in your city. It is in your country, like it belongs to you. So ancestors are usually named as the real owners of things. So this seems to be like an affirmation, basically, right? You're still there, you're doing things for us, our dear ancestor. We are at your service, right? You are our Lord. There are other kinds of pronouns. So this here we'll look at more like I examples, right? Your. This is his, and his, of course, is much more common. And on Wednesday, we'll talk about tags, the fact that there are a lot of tags. But of course, you can have third person singular with just verbs. So here's a god painting. You can see they're holding in like an inkwells and little brushes. And the hieroglyph says utsib kuch. The god paints. So that's what they do, right? And this is the omen of Chuck, God. Or maybe it is his writing. It is the omen. So maybe they're writing the omens. I mean, again, there are different ways to interpret the scene, right? This is one of my favorite tagged objects. It's a little stone hairless dog. And it was found in a grave next to its owner, presumably. And it says, this is the dog of his dog, right? Utsi, or her dog, or his dog. Most likely his, I think it was a male burial. Utsi, it is his dog. Ach kakao, the rich man, he who has chocolate. That's how Maya would say the rich man. Two, and then the period of time. Does anyone remember what period of time it is? Katun, yeah, so 20 years. So 2 katun, remember that's how people describe age. So if somebody is 2 katun, what their age is? 40 max, right? So between basically 21 and 40. A lot of my people died around that, but like many Asian societies, not because you're unhealthy, because politics happen, of course, diseases, right? They can kill you. You usually make it past childhood, and then you have a good chance to live into your late 30s and 40s. And after that, there's another major like selective pressure event. So some people then make it to their 80s, but a lot of people don't. And it's different for men. Warfare and violence, and for women's childbirth is a major risk factor, of course. And then he, from, and unfortunately it would be a place name. It's not very clear because the glyphs are eroded. So, but it's interesting, it was found in sort of middle-class house at the city of Tonina in Chiapas. You may remember Tonina because it was the kingdom of Popo, and one of the few places where we know people spoke a non-Cholan language like Total. So it was probably something like a rich merchant, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. So it wasn't like a king.
No, so probably like a rich merchant who really loved his hairless dog. This is one of the earliest unambiguous depictions of hairless dogs in Maya art. It's very clear with like this like little head hair, and sort of like in the Pixar movie, right? He was buried with his hairless dog, perhaps to guide him, right, to the other side.
A lot of Romans did that too. They would go see like they've got like statues of their dog or little inscriptions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This one is unique, right? We don't usually see them, so we don't know to what extent there was a broad belief or just this particular person really wanted to do it. Maybe because he traveled to other places where people believed in those stuff, like in central Mexico. Who knows? And these are other common ways of say mostly possession, right? So Yal, child of mother, Yunan, child of father. So even though there's no gender in Maya languages, almost no gender, some words are very important in terms of child of father, child of mother for kinship terms. So these are actually different words. So you cannot just say child in Maya language. There's no such word. There are different words, whether you're talking about an offspring of one's mother or an offspring of one's father. And it's funny when someone back translates from English into Mayan languages and makes mistakes. So in the Apocalypto, Mel Gibson, there's a hunting scene at the beginning of the movie. I know if you've seen Apocalypto. And the father of the family gathers all his children as they eat the deer. And he says, my children. And he says, Niyal. And it's kind of weird because is he thinking that he's their mother? Is he like non-binary? Is she just crazy? And his kid's like, okay, that is crazy. Fine. But of course, she's not a native speaker. The actor is not a native speaker. The actors around him are non-native speakers. None of them is. And so basically, they don't know. Nobody told them. It's a typical mistake when you back translate, right? Because in English or in Spanish, there is no difference. But in Yucatec, they're speaking one of the Mayan languages. There is. Yebet, ebet, literally his or her or their messenger. It's in, younger brother. Her, his, their younger brother. Yotot, their house. His, her house. Yotot. So this is the yi, yo, ye, ya. And of course, as you can see, the sign keeps changing, right? Because of the next vowel. So it could be ya, ye, yi, yo, you. So all of these options are possible. So the sign itself, it doesn't really give you a clue whether you're looking at a pronoun or not. Sometimes it can be ambiguous. Now you can combine multiple pronouns in a phrase, like the one, remember, uchak pakal kinich versus chaku pakal kinich. But here you have utok pakal, or sometimes utok upakal. So here you have the same pakal, pakala, with u, and this is tok, utok, and here logograms, flint and shield, tok, pakal. And literally it's one of those poetic couplets, like literally spear, the flint, and the shield, the weapons, but it can also refer to armies of someone's army, someone's weapons in war. And so utok, upakal, his flint, his shield, or his flint shield. But here, the pakal is not possessing tok, and we know it just from examples, right? They both belong to someone else. This is the other way of interpreting. This is yebul or yebil, the stairway of. Erb is a stairway. Yerbul, presumably possession, or yerbil. And then umukil or umukul, the burial of. And then Hulz Ipipahal, divine lord of Kopan, the archaeological site of Kopan. Probably it's Ipip or Shupip in ancient tongue. And so in this case, it's like sequential possession. Like the burial belongs to the Kopan king, and the stairway belongs to the burial. And they're talking about the stairway of a funeral shrine that contains the tomb. So in this way, you kind of have to interpret it as part of a sequence, kind of nested sequence of possessions. In the same way as in English, right? You can translate it is the stairway, it is his tomb, but you can also translate it is the stairway of the tomb of, right? The stairway of the tomb of the king of Kapan. And just like in Mayan languages, the position of the word and the placement of basically gives you the possession. Sometimes these statements can be inherently ambiguous, just like in English. So, tehkah is stepped, yoke, his foot, to Witzil, the mountain of Ukuhul, his god, is stepped his foot upon the mountain of his god. So, whose foot? Like the king steps his foot upon the mountain of the king's god, or the foot of the god is stepped upon the mountain of the king's god. Either is possible, right? I prefer that the foot is that of the king, and then the mountain is of the king's god. To make the matters more confusing, the king is actually dressed as the god. So there's like a depiction of the king dressed as the god. So like the foot can belong to both visually. And perhaps that's why the text is so ambiguous. Maybe I'm just stretching it a little bit. So that's the problem with multiple possessions. This one is a little more straightforward. It reads Yul Shuli, literally Yul Ushul, the polishing, the carving. So it's a beautiful, like another couplet, like the act of decorating someone in stone. The two common things you do: you polish, you drill, and then you carve, you scratch. Yushul, polishing, carving. Utunil or tunul, the stone of. Umukil or umukul, the burial of. So the polishing, the carving of the tombstone, basically, right? Of the stone of his tomb. So this is a gravestone. They describe how they finished it at the beginning of the grave inscription. And in this case, it's just sequential possession. The carving belongs to the stone belongs to the grave belongs to the fellow buried there. And then the second category of pronouns are the independent pronouns, right? So like English, as for me, as for you, as for him, as for her, as for them, except of course there's no gender, so it's just as for them, either singular or plural. And as for you versus as for you all. Now you sometimes see those asterisks. That means we can reconstruct it based on modern Mayan languages. We have never seen those examples in actual Maya writing. So like as for you all, there's not a single example so far. Because you need someone talking to someone, right? To a group, like as for you all. And unfortunately it hasn't happened. Or as for us, we have so few us in general, and not a single case when someone really wants to put an emphasis on, as for us, we shall do this. So it's possible, but not yet attested. Hin, as for me, and you can see there are variants, hat, het. This seems to be like little dialects, variants. Sechorti today is het, or not set actually, but the dominant form in the classical seems to be hat or hat. And then just vowel length changes. These are just some examples from colonial texts. This is Chontal, so the pronouns themselves are different, but it gives you a sense of how this is actually used in the sentence. So hein, shach kabihil. This, and that's the independent pronoun, it is my road. It's like this is my path, right? In that sense, like I'm going to take it. Hai nob, as for them, Francisco Felipe talk Luis Garcia, alcalde sob. So Francisco Felipe together with Luis Garcia, the alcaldes. Of course, this is a Spanish word with like Maya plural. It's like a double plural, right? Alcaldes, ob. Because I guess they don't quite understand that alcaldes is plural, so they add their own. But as for them, so you can see like independent pronouns are usually used for emphasis. So you have, say, a long string of things, but then you want to put like something there that really highlights the agent. Or you want to make a statement like, this shall be my road, this shall be my path. So for me, this is my path. Very much like independent pronouns function in English. Or takpam, natson, Juan Batista Escribano, huitzi kabi. This is obviously part of the testimony, right? Me, the scribe, here in this town, right? So somebody making a legal statement. So they want to make an emphasis once again, me, the scribe. So once again, myself. Before me, takpam, me, Juan Batista, scribe in this town, here. This is a classic Maya inscription. Hin, it's part of the trickster bunny reporting his fraud and of course lying about stealing a hat. He says, me, I made hats. So like no stolen stuff here. I made them. Hot, as for you, this is one of my favorite uses of you. Chak, and chak means red, but also means great, big. So chak patana, wub til tahat yalhi hub tichich. Great work, mouth blowing for you, said the shell to the deer. And you can see that the deer is smoking. So like basically blowing your mouth is a lot of work for you, said the shell to the deer. There's apparently a sequence of events in which shell makes like social commentaries. And they're all about people doing things when they're not supposed to be doing. So basically the deer is lazy, just sits and does nothing but smoke. So So for you, tahat. So obviously an emphasis for you. Smoking, lots of work for you. This is that scene in which, remember, one of the attendants is banging his chest saying, I am your man, heart of the sky. They're visitors, and they say, you, Hat, Ka-chan, our guardian. Like, basically, you are our guardian. As for you, our guardian. Because probably not you are our guardian, because then you have a pronoun here, but just as for you, our guardian. They're addressing the king. Basically, they're seeking his protection. And the king actually says, Hi ahanal akushbich. Here is your sustenance, your drinks, like alcoholic, because something that enlivens, because your grandfather told so. And so, like, in respect of your grandfather, this is your sustenance, this is your drink. So, like, feasting for you. So they're all very happy, at least in the retrospective account. Here, as for you, het, and there's another one, het, twice in the text, because that's the God is talking to all of them, all the 8,000 gods, but presumably specifically, well, as for you, you're gonna do this, as for you, you're gonna do that. So, like, giving instructions to the members of his court. Ha, as for him, so that's a third person singular. I really like this statement. It's a king, he does all kinds of things according to the ritual. And there's a scene of you holding a double-headed serpent. And from the mouth of the serpent, you see like a storm god emerging, like a lightning bolts emerging from the serpent. And in the middle of the text, there's Ha, as for him, he conjures the 18-head serpent. Presumably that thing that he holds in his arms. And they use a very specific grammatical form, which is absent in English only from context, which refers to habitual action. Like, we call it anti-passive. And so it's like, as for me, I do something for fun, right? I hunt for fun. I joke all the time. And this is like habitual, right? Not specific. As for this king, he spends most of his time conjuring the 18-head serpent. But it's also perhaps referring to the fact that that's how he is depicted. So from now on, like, this manifestation of him is conjuring the 18-head serpent forever. It's also the main event, presumably. So that's why you have the pronoun there and this unusual grammatical form. Instead of saying he conjured the serpent, it's he conjures the serpent all the time. And of course, this is plural, haob, as for them, haoba, haoba, haob. And this is another stele from Copan, and it's a little weird because it mentions 4 kings of the 4 greatest kingdoms, and it's unlikely they're there during the event, more like a general statement, what they do. And the text says, as for them, the 4 trees of the sky, the 4 spirits of the sky, the 4 tails of the sky, the 4 hoofs of the sky. I have no idea what's going on there, like why did they, but there are 4 of them. The king of Copan, the king of Tikal, the king of Calakmul, the king of Palenque, those who open the holes, those who close the holes. But it's interesting, the stele actually has an offering chamber in front of it, so that's probably what they're talking about, like those who open the offering chambers, those who close. Like, these are the kings who make the main offerings every 20 years, like the greatest priests, essentially, of the Mayan nation. This idea of Mayanist, what it means, they try to express it, right? And then finally, I have some time left. This is a great example of Maya pronouns. This is my favorite Maya object. If you ever visit my office, I have like a picture of it on my wall. We call it the regal rabbit vase. And that nickname comes from the time when people could not read it. And so as we progress through my writing, we'll read additional parts of this vase with extra detail. But for now, we're looking at pronouns. And as you can see, there are 2 scenes. In one scene, there is an elderly god who is totally naked. And he stands in front of a mountain. You see all these mountains? Like a living mountain, like an animate mountain. And someone is standing on it. So who's that? Any animal? Which animal? Rabbit. Yes. Rabbit. Big ears, beard. Rabbits have beard apparently. It's like, and he has all the stuff taken from the naked god, like all of the possessions. And they're talking. You can see like little speech scrolls. So they're actually saying something to each other. So there's a conversation. And then there's the same god with slightly more clothing, kind of ad hoc clothing. Some gnat, some strings here, and he's in front of another mountain with a throne, and someone is talking to him, and you can see he has little sun markings on the body. Kin. That's the sun god, and he has a centipede head in the headdress because he's the eastern, like rising sun god, whose full name is 7 Centipede Eagle Resplendent Lord. And he's 7 centipedes because sun rays are centipedes. You're in the tropics. Sun is not your friend. It burns when it touches your skin. So the powerful like sun warrior, he basically shoots his sun rays as burning centipedes in all directions. Because 7 means like the entire world, right? There's your 4 cardinal directions: top, bottom, center. So that kind of sun. So he's talking to the sun god. And there's an extra vertical text, and then there's horizontal text. The horizontal text is an ownership statement, and we'll talk about these texts too. And of course, it's all in third person. So it says, Ut ibal, the decoration of, or his decoration, uhai, literally thin thing. And we actually see, there's a market scene of someone, ahai, like literally fine vessel seller. Our best, I guess, analogy would be like, say, China, right? Like the fine things, like thin-walled stuff. So the decoration of the thin-walled stuff, this is what this object is. Yukib, literally drinking utensil of someone, right? His or her, their. So in this case, it's a nested possession, but from this moment on, it's the same thing, like mentioned twice, the fine vessel of someone, and then the drinking utensil of someone. And then this part is ambiguous because it starts with a preposition, so it's obviously purpose, for, with, and then utal cacao. And the utal, you can either think of this as a possessive, so the fruit of cacao, but the problem is that some of the words fruit, they already include the glide, so it can also be just fruity cacao. There's no way to decide which of the two it is. I prefer fruity cacao, and that would mean that it's not just chocolate, but perhaps the actual chocolate fruit, because you can also drink stuff made out of it. Usually it's just, they allow it to rot so that the beans would ferment in its own juice, and then you wash and collect the beans. But you can basically make a sweet drink out of it too. So that's just the ownership part, and you can see a lot of pronouns, just third person, all possessed, right, ergatives. And this is the text. They're talking. And this part is weird, and we're still struggling with some of the terms. There's several alternative translations, but the beginning says, Ilik Nimam, my grandson, and most likely grandson because he's told he doesn't have grandparents. My grandson shall see, or would see, by Nibuch, where my clothes are. You, something, the moon, already something, myself, Niba, my image. So presumably he says, probably I'm going to tell myself, like you and something moon, I'm going to tell myself. And apparently the story is that he gets naked with the moon goddess, and it doesn't go well according to the plan. He ends up naked without his stuff that the bunny's taking. So it's a kind of conspiracy between the moon goddess and the bunny. The rabbit says, Pulu ahol, strike your head. So one of those imperatives, so you're supposed to read every sound of this, pulu, and then ahol, your head. Pulu ahol, strike your head. Utsu al wheat, smell your buttocks. So another imperative. And of course, wheat is actually eat is not buttocks, but something anatomically more specific in most Mayan languages, between the buttocks. But it's just details. So smell your buttocks, and actually continue saying other nasty things that we'll learn when we discuss body parts and possession, sort of intimate possession in Maya text. So it's actually not unusual for Bunny to swear in Maya folklore because he is a trickster. So he's allowed to do these things. And so he's the one who's mischievous, generally, helps the poor, fights the rich, but sometimes doesn't quite know which one is which. And so there he is, swearing, basically. One of the few known examples of pure swearing. Recorded, of course, just with syllables for the most part. And then there's a second scene in which the old god, with some makeshift clothing, goes to his grandson to complain. And he says, Baliu, my colleague Mark Zender thought that maybe it is aha, like Lord. I'm not sure. It's probably something that the rabbit did or does. Grammatically, it's hard to decide like what Baliu stands for. There are a couple of good possibilities, but Baliu something rabbit. That's a glyph that refers to the rabbit. Unfortunately, it occurs only in this vessel. So for some reason, no, there's not much on bunny lore on most Maya monuments. So it refers to the bunny, but it remains unique to this inscription. Rabbit, tul, he took my, and there's some possibilities here. One idea was that it's jewels, like and then syllabic ha. The other possibility is actually a recently deciphered syllable we, and then ha, or just even logogram eh. He took my tooth. And you would think, like, why would he take a tooth? But it's actually a common theme that tricksters or hero twins steal the magic tooth of the old god, like false king, the false son, and deprive him of his magical power. And in this case, they take his tooth, they take his hat, they take his clothing. And so he took my tooth, he took my clothing, he took my patan, my taxes, my tribute, my work. So presumably everything was taken from him. It's a great example for a lot of personal pronouns. And the sun god is answering. Machach ul tahin nimam. The rabbit is not with me, my grandpa. Huli, as he went, sak something lem witsnal into the place of the seed. It's like foamy water, but we're not sure how to read. Probably shiny mountain. In the north, shaman, with the moon. And you can clearly see that the rabbit didn't go anywhere. He's just hiding behind his back. Yeah, so they're all in the game, like basically making the life of poor god of the underworld actually a little more miserable. He lives in the mountain. He's what today they would call dueño, a duende, the person you make a pacto with in exchange for riches. So he owns animals and chocolate, and here he gets tricked by the moon goddess. And the funny part about it, or the interesting part about it, is this is political humor. This cup was painted about the time when a powerful royal regent, the queen whose name was Ishwak Chan Halam Lem, the female jewel of the loom of the mountain of the six skies. That was her name. It evokes the loom of the moon goddess in the celestial palace of the king of gods, Itzam Kokach. And the moon goddess is his spouse. The one who, of course, plots against this god, God El. So she was a very powerful queen. And actually, this monument is going to be in the Met Museum for the next 2 years as a loan from Guatemala to the United States. And it shows the queen dressed as the moon goddess. And guess what? There is a naked, unfortunate fellow under her feet. He is the ruler of Quinchil. And Quinchil was burned twice We know it from a different text, and conquered shortly before that image happened. The god of Kinchil is this fella. This is their god. We know it once again from inscriptions. They say that he lived in Kinchil. That was his mountain. So they literally recreate the story physically, right? She is the moon goddess. She defeats him. And that's when they paint that pot. So they must have reenacted the whole thing. And then there were like these commemorative drinking cups you could get, like souvenirs. Remember Kinchil. Remember Kinchil. That's what happens to our enemies. And to make it extra creepy, she is doing a blood offering ritual. So she holds, like, you can see like knives with like her blood. And the text says, Al-Maik, literally raising the gift, like her own blood sacrifice. But in addition to that, they put extra glyphs into the bowl that say eternal, spiritual, fiery conquest. So like fire and blood. And we know they burned those cities. We're not sure about Kinchil. We never identified the site. But they mentioned another city that they also burned, that we excavated, our project, Witsna, and they literally burned it to the ground.
They're using fire as a war tactic.
Yeah. So like they went full Targaryen on these cities. They really did so. And then here's the surviving member of one of the burned cities. He's stepping on him, and he's like, just like the moon goddess did. And so we often imagine our actions in terms of like Roman and Greek mythology or the Holy Scripture. And here's like a political regime at Naranjo basically saying, has to be done, was done before, that's the way things are. It's a great example of my political rhetoric. It's not just they like funny things, they're very, very specific when it comes to that. One of the few known examples when we can see like the political propaganda message sort of on multiple media, presumably circulating amongst different members of the court. Remember that example from the mighty idiot or mighty mute? That's also Naranjo. So presumably same idea, like you have a portable item that circulates with kind of more extreme variant of the political message. Presumably amongst not the peasants, right? Not the commoners, but the members of the court, but like the lower ranks of the nobles, sort of spreading the message.
A couple of really innovative scribes who came up with that idea.
Something, right? Because it's really remarkable. It seems that they're really communicating across multiple media, but staying on message. Right? Unless, of course, you're that fellow. He doesn't seem to be happy at all. He may not essentially be happy with this kind of new political twist, right? It's interesting, though, that the story there's a follow-up to the story, and that's the last thing I wanted to mention. They actually make peace with God El. So he goes to complain to the celestial king of gods, remember, the husband of the moon goddess, with all of the moons. Because the moon goddess is not the only moon. The full moon cycle contains several moons. There is a death moon, the fire moon, the water serpent moon, the maize god moon, and they all come to basically moon god saying like, not okay, not okay, don't do that. And she gives them away the bunny, and the bunny gives away the stuff back to God El, like, no, take it back. There's another scene, of course, where she also gives it back, basically. And there are other scenes in which other star gods, they go to the moon goddess and her husband, who would be sitting here, and they basically feast, and they agree on the new order of things, like, don't do this, let's have peace, we'll pay you taxes. And it's interesting, this plot is also from Naranjo, also from the same time period. So that message, like, you're gonna get fire and blood, was only part of the narrative. Second part was, we're one big happy kingdom, like, for the survivors. So it's interesting too, right? So there was this notion. This story also has the second part, which is reconciliation between the gods, and they also played it out apparently at Naranjo. Although the extent to which everyone was on board, we don't know. Of course, we only have the view from Naranjo. Perhaps not everyone was happy, even when there was a lot of free drinks. Who knows? So remember pronouns. dependent pronouns or bound pronouns, and then independent. And then these two sets, you need to learn them as part of the basic grammar, right? So, and we'll, of course, we'll do more text. Fortunately for us, most of the text will be a third person. But it's still important to understand the distinction when you use them. That with some verbs, it's ergative pronouns, but then with intransitives, it's absolutive.